Well, as I said, Boris Johnson has done it again. The UK Prime Minister has stunned political pundits by leading his Conservative Party to score 364 seats out of 650 in the House of in Parliament. And this has been the country's most dramatic electoral victory in decades. It was crushing defeat for the opposition Labour Party with just 203 seats, way behind the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats have gained 11 seats, while the Scottish National Party posted big gains in Scotland, of course, with those 48 seats, and that certainly will determine many things as well. And joining us to talk a little bit more about the UK elections is Katie Hopkins, columnist, British broadcaster, and live from London, as well as Andrew Whitehead, writer and former BBC senior journalist, also live with us from London. And Andrew Whitehead, if I can come to you first, you've also written a piece today about what this election has really meant for Boris Johnson and, of course, Jeremy Corbyn. A huge win for Boris Johnson, better than many expected. Obviously, many Labour supporters have swung towards the Tories. So all in all, a success for Boris Johnson with his messaging clear, while Jeremy Corbyn faltering on his messaging.
Yes, it's an emphatic success for Boris Johnson. There's no way around that. His campaign slogan, "Get Brexit Done," which he repeated endlessly, has delivered. I think many people, and not just Leavers, were fed up of 3.5 years since the Brexit referendum of acute division, polarisation, confusion, and they just wanted the issue sorted. And I think Boris Johnson campaigned well, and he was up against an opposition leader in Jeremy Corbyn, who, as you say, didn't do the job. He didn't come across as leadership material. He was mired in allegations of not tackling anti-Semitism within his own party. His promises for public spending appeared profligate, and nobody quite understood what Labour's policy was on Brexit. So all in all, in a sense, you're not really surprised that Jeremy Corbyn polled so very badly.
Right. And Katie Hopkins then, as I said, that Boris Johnson, of course, with his sweeping majority, exiting the European Union will be the easy part, but not negotiating the divorce deal for which Boris Johnson has set a 1-year deadline.
Absolutely. There is still tricky stuff to come. But I think what's really the headline out of all of this, and the bit that I need to really help your audience understand, is this is not just a win for British nationalists like myself, people who want to put British people first. This is a massive win for our Indian diaspora here in the UK. They have faced relentless attacks from the Pakistani Muslim mob, particularly in London, as you'll be aware of. I have gone face-to-face, head-to-head with many of them. And what this victory for Boris Johnson means is that we have not got Jeremy Corbyn and his Islam party, as it is, a de facto Islam party, anywhere near number 10, and that is critical. This is I have to tell you, I haven't been to sleep. British people fighting back, and yet again, we've got Trump, we've got Modi, and now we've got Boris Johnson, Bolsonaro. The rise of the right is really here. This is really exciting times, and people are surprised, of course, because nobody in London, in our capital city, or anybody from the BBC can listen properly to ordinary people. They have no idea what's actually going on in the rest of the UK.
As Andrew Whitehead, now as Katie Hopkins was making that point about it's the rise of the right versus the left in many parts of the world, and we've seen what happened with the UK as well. But just going back to that point about, this campaign was divisive, and of course Jeremy Corbyn made many mistakes. He didn't apologize for the anti-Semitism statements that he made, but Boris Johnson was not exactly the media's favorite. He also made some mistakes. He was, once in a while fast and loose with facts. Where do you see the UK going from here?
Well, this was our third general election within 5 years. It was a fairly flat and uneventful campaign. So people were saying this was the most important election for a generation. It didn't really feel like that in terms of the energy of the campaign. I think it is right, as Katie Hopkins was suggesting, that Boris Johnson's success with a more populist, nationalist, determinedly right-wing agenda does fit into something of a global pattern, which we've seen in different ways, very different ways, in the States, in Brazil, you could argue in India as well. But I really disagree with her. She can't really that Corbyn's Labour Party is an Islam party. That is simply wrong. And while it is true that the Indian community, the Indian origin community in the UK, has broadly started to change its political allegiances, so not all in the Labour camp, many voting for Johnson's Conservatives, as we've seen, there are still as many Indian origin Labour MPs as Conservatives, even though overall there are many fewer Labour MPs than there are Conservatives.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I know that Katie Hopkins doesn't agree with this, but I just briefly want to move on from this point. Katie, if you want to make a short comment on this and then move on to other aspects of this election, go on.
Yeah, of course. So a very short comment there. And of course, Andrew has entitled to his view, but very clearly messaging coming out from the Indian embassy that I was just there the other day, having watched that building being defaced by the Pakistani mob. And of course, that is a capital city that is presided over by a Muslim mayor, and it was left defaced for many days. I am acutely aware of the need for the Indian diaspora to have this Conservative majority. This is a great day for the Indian diaspora. I think absolutely there's some names there. Tan Desai from Slough. He's a Labour MP now. He's supposed to represent the Indian diaspora. He's a Hindu, but, he is a traitor to the cause. Absolutely. He's dependent on the Muslim vote. And as a result, he's the one banging on about a made-up term, Islamophobia, in Parliament. So we have to be cautious. Some of these characters are not acting in the way that
Okay.
But certainly, as we look forward to the UK, the Muslim population of this country is going to be the largest population in 15 years, and that's what the Labour Party is counting its new vote on. It will become the Islam Party. Anyway, you wanted to move along.
Okay. Well, sure. I mean, this is, of course, the Labour's fourth successive loss, so it is a critical moment for the Labour Party. Andrew Whitehead, now, what about Scotland voting for the Nationalist Party that wants an independence from referendum, and the Irish nationalists performing strongly in Northern Ireland? These issues certainly looking challenging for Boris Johnson and his vision of a united kingdom, as he said, quote unquote.
Yes, and particularly Scotland. I mean, there are two winners in yesterday's election. Boris Johnson, by far the biggest winner, but Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, the leader of the pro-independence Scottish National Party, has once again demonstrated the party's almost complete dominance of Scottish politics. She will press very hard now for a second independence referendum. She wants Scotland, an independent Scotland, to remain part of the European Union. And there is going to be, in coming months, a big bust-up. But in the end, it's the Westminster government, it's the UK-wide government, which decides whether there will be a second independence referendum. And Boris Johnson has made clear there won't. But there'll be a lot of arguing about it. And I think it's going to be quite tricky for Boris Johnson to manage to keep the four nations of the United Kingdom together. He is a British nationalist, more than an English nationalist, but the tensions between Scotland and England in particular are going to become more acute, I think, in the months and years ahead.
Okay. And Katie Hopkins, now, what about the other issues other than Brexit? Now, where does this leave Britain's state-funded services, in particularly, which I know that Jeremy Corbyn has spoken about at length, not so much Boris Johnson in this election?
No, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things Labour, Jeremy Corbyn, never really reconciled with this magical unicorn, free everything for everyone idea that Labour always has. He was kind of, let's open the borders, let's have more migration, let's let all the people stay here, and let's have a free healthcare service. Now, those two things clearly are not compatible. So one of the great things we have, and very, very much we're indebted to Priti Patel, who has taken such a firm line on immigration historically. We are now going to have an Australian-style points-based immigration system. We will be able to have some level of control over our immigration, and Boris Johnson says we are now going to charge people from overseas who want to use our healthcare service. So the Boris Johnson win also very critical for our NHS and a relief in many ways as well. The Corbyn policies, I don't know if people are aware, they was planning to take over people's, if you're a landlord, they could expropriate effectively your housing. There was a suggestion of shutting down private schooling. His policies were truly radical. So in many ways, a lot of us this morning, particularly me on the school run, breathing a sigh of relief. I would just like to say one thing on the issue of Scotland. Whilst Nicola Sturgeon is the voice of Scotland in the sense that she's the leader of the Scottish Nationalist Party, she does not speak for many, many people in Scotland who are silenced. In the last referendum, the people of Scotland voted to stay with Cool Britannia. We don't get to hear their voices because the ginger dwarf from the north monopolises all conversations. But actually, there's a massive swathe of Scotland who want to stay with the Union. And I, for one, hope that Boris Johnson, with his massive personality, can help join us together. And I think what we saw when Boris Johnson was London Mayor, it was a very unifying time for our nation. And let's hope now that the nationalists have taken control of England, now we can start the fight back for London as well and kick Sadiq Khan out of London.
Okay. Andrew Whitehead, I'll give you the last word there. So we believe the last vote has also been counted and it is 365. That's the final seat share for the Conservatives is what I'm picking up at the moment. All in all, of course, this was a lackluster campaign by everybody else. It was all about Boris Johnson and then a little about Jeremy Corbyn. And Jeremy Corbyn really needs to go and have a rethink. This is the second defeat under him and, of course, the fourth for the Labour in as many years.
Yes, Jeremy Corbyn's political career is over. It's not yet clear whether he will stand down soon. He's suggesting he's going to stay in office for maybe a few weeks or months. I think he may reconsider that. But there will now be a bitter battle for the succession between the centre-left, what you might call the moderate wing within the Labour Party, and the hard left, which is loyal to Jeremy Corbyn. This election outcome will suggest that actually Labour's best bet, Labour's only bet, if it wants to be a party of government again, is to go for the centre-left option. But the decision rests with Labour Party's membership, and most of the members are now sympathetic to the hard left. So Labour faces a very tough decision. It is at a crisis point, and it's very difficult to work out which way it's going to go.
Right, absolutely. Andrew Whitehead and Katie Hopkins, thanks very much indeed for joining us and sharing your perspective on what this UK election win for Boris Johnson means for the UK and, of course, for the rest of the world as well. Thanks indeed for that.